Hello and welcome to my channel. I am San J1 and today this is another podcast, and this time I'll be talking about fantasy versus non-fantasy. Yeah, today is our topic. So first of all, before talking about fantasy or non-fantasy, I'll have to tell you all, if you're not really that habituated with stories, there are three kinds of story, or technically what can I say, books, I guess. One is your guidebooks that obviously everyone uses, and basically I'm not talking about the guidebooks, I'm basically talking about the story ones. I mean, yeah, there are three kinds. One is your non-fiction, another is your fiction, another is your fan fiction. Yeah, fan fiction is not considered the official one. I mean, in official classifications, fan fiction isn't counted. It's basically just another classification for fictions which borrows characters from others' works. That's what's considered fan fiction. And yeah, I know many people know about it, but technically, fan fiction means borrowing characters, borrowing plot, or borrowing the world. You have to borrow something from an existing fiction. That's actually what's called fan fiction. Non-fiction actually means non-fiction and fiction. These are technically official terms. Fan fiction is just for Wattpad Railroad. Yes, it exists. Even web novel, I guess, has fan fiction. But for KDB, fan fiction doesn't exist because it's not allowed. It's actually considered stealing. Alright, first of all, for non-fiction, it's mainly about it will reveal real life events. That's what is non-fiction. I mean, if you write something about Adolf Hitler's lifestyle or something about well, maybe Giuseppe Mazzini or something like that. I mean, about some real historical figures. You may even write about Christopher Colombo. So something like that, which actually happened in real life. A fiction about, it's actually called non-fiction, which definitely is a story about real life events. So yeah, these all falls under non-fiction. And finally, fiction is the category which means fiction is technically the stuff that doesn't happen in real life, which is imaginary. Which means the characters existing in fiction will not be present in real life. Or if they by any chance reveal something in real life, they should at least be inspired. It won't really reveal the entire plot of what happened, or maybe similar looking plot from real life. This is classified as fiction. So yes, I guess the definitions are clear pretty much. So, well, now from fiction there are two classifications. One is your non-fantasy and another is your fantasy. So now we are coming on to the topic. So enough with the blabbering. Fantasy and non-fantasy. Non-fantasy means something, a fiction, which will have no magical elements, or something which is similar to real life except the characters are not real life. That's considered non-fantasy. What this means is, for example, you are writing about an anime. For example, let's just say Toradora. It could be considered non-fantasy because it has got absolutely no fantasy elements. Toradora anime, I don't think many of you would know, but most obviously it could be high school or anything, but it will absolutely have nothing that is not present in real life. Everything in non-fantasy should be about real life events, and if it consists even a millimeter of or maybe some a bit of magical elements, is actually considered low fantasy. Yes, there is another category, which I guess many of you may not know. It's called low fantasy. Yes, for example, if there is black magic in it, that's considered low fantasy. And then there is high fantasy, which means the entire world, or at least most of the scenarios surrounding or plot, would be based on magical elements or fantastical elements, which is actually considered high fantasy. Or basically, for example, superhero transformations, everyone transforming to superheroes, etc. It's also considered fantasy because obviously it doesn't exist in real life. So obviously, if you have just a character with black magic, for example, I have a story bound by light and darkness, it will be considered low fantasy because there is one character with black magic, one or two characters with some special powers. That's actually considered low fantasy. So, anyways, now about the part. Now we are coming on to the war between non-fantasy and fantasy. So, what you can understand by this is non-fantasy is equal to real world, and fantasy is equal to something of your imagination. You are creating the rules and logic. Yes, on a writer's perspective, you can say, I will say as a writer, I feel fantasy feels more like home to me compared to non-fantasy. The reason behind it, well, for example, I'm saying that, for example, non-fantasy, it feels like you are copying from real life. Like you are taking inspirations from real life events and you're just making a story. So, technically speaking, it's far easier to make a non-fantasy compared to making a fantasy story. Obviously, non-fantasy could be pretty tough depending on circumstances. Like if you're creating some complex characters, that's a different level. Yeah, that could be considered tough in writing. But in general speaking, though, anyone can actually write non-fantasy pretty much. Yeah, even though it won't be the best, but yeah, it's possible to make a consistent non-fantasy plot because it revolves around real life. And also, I'd say it's a pretty good starting point for ones who are willing to write some original fiction. You should always start with non-fantasy. It could be very helpful. I mean, if you are at least not that confident in writing, starting with fantasy is fine. But with the help of AI, it could be far easier. I use AI exactly for that because my fictions are mostly about fantasy. Now, well, that's one. Another thing is, fantasy feels more like home, even though it could be tough. As per non-fantasy, it's like you were writing a fan fiction of the world when you have got no ideas. Yeah, that's how I feel. It's just my philosophy. It's not like the universal truth, but the way I imagine it is this way. Fantasy means you are creating your own world, you have got the entire control over it, you make the rules, you make the laws. And you are technically like the actual god of the fantastical universe. And non-fantasy feels more like borrowing from the real world. You are like borrowing a sample from the real world and just adding your characters there and just starting a plot. And technically it's considered original because obviously if you don't have anything on mind, then it's obviously a good choice. But it doesn't totally feel like home. It's like you are borrowing a flat or maybe a quarter. So it's still considered your home, but it's not really something that you call a real home. For example, if I talk about business, if you are something like a manager, if you're writing non-fantasy, you will probably fall under manager. And if you're writing something like, if you write fantasy, you'll fall under entrepreneur who owns the business technically, yeah, or the owner of the business. And if you write something like, what is called, yeah, manager, non-fantasy, which is equal to manager. meaning that you are not owning that, you are not owning the world, you are not owning the business, you are just borrowing it. And yes, it's pretty effective. But the fact is, world, it's pretty easier for manager. I mean, owner, actually there are disadvantages and advantages of everything. See, the logic is all decided by you, just like the entrepreneur or the owner. You have got the entire responsibilities of how the world of fancy will work, which is the difficulty technically. And if we talk about the difficulty of non-fancy, yes, it's difficult. Manager is always having it hard, but yes, one thing is for sure, if the business just drops down, then manager can technically opt to flee. It won't really harm the enterprises of the manager. So if you think about it in those terms, if you're a non-fancy writer, you are technically having the entire world under. You already know all the rules of the world, and pretty much your audience knows it. So definitely, if you have anything, you don't have to explain everything. In case of your non-fancy, as for fancy, you have to explain how this happens, why this happens, how the logic applies, etc. Though yes, if you are writing something like tokusatsu anime type, then you don't really have to work that much on it. It may be a bit reduced. You can focus more on superpowers, just like I do. I don't really write such kinds of fancy. I think the most toughest ones would be the lit RPG ones. Those would be the toughest to write because you have to follow all the game rules. Those are what I consider the most hardcore types. And yes, if I really have to make it, I'll have to work hard on it. Yes, I'll definitely use AI, but even with AI though, it's definitely not that easy to make it. You need some creativity and imaginations. So yeah. So anyways, so the final thought about it is fancy and non-fancy. Whatever you write, you got to have the best and creativity to create. You can manage anything if you have that. If you want non-fancy, yeah, go with it. You may plan a fancy story later. But yes, if you want to create fancy, you have to have the motivation and passion to create. Even something like Celestic Warriors, let me just be blunt. It's not like I'm showing that I'm pretty great as a writer, no. It's even something like Celestic Warriors is a pretty tough one to manage. Yeah, for a beginner, I would say it's true because using AI also leads to pretty much many inconsistencies. In plots, you may get some inconsistencies, like you may forget something that you probably previously said that yeah, this is how it works and all, and then suddenly, like, specifically the problem here is the moves. I mainly had problems remembering the moves technically. Yeah, I gave names like randomly, or maybe used AI to come up with some good move names, I guess. But technically, there's just going on and making the plot consistent. That actually takes effort, even if you are just sort of impulsively creating everything. So yes, it definitely takes much effort, even for something like that. And yes, for series, it's pretty much pretty hard work. As for non-fancy, you should always try with it. Just always try seeing if you can do it. A romance story is a normal romance. You don't have to compete with the genre. You can probably try writing anything that you can write. After that, you can focus on fantasy, or you may even try fancy. You can just test how good you can do. But anyways, both of them deserve to exist, and both of them are good on their own rights. So yeah, at the end of the day, fantasy is more dominant in case of anime. So if you want anime like Fail, I guess fantasy would do. I will lean more towards fantasy animes. So yeah, that's all for today, and hope to see you all in the next video.